And welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Kibs, and today we're going to be talking about something interesting. It's called Mix's Legends of Terrestria. That is the game we're actually working on, and more specifically, a story that I am currently crafting. Now, today we're going to actually talk about something a little bit interesting here. We're going to talk about story arcs and how the story functions in a sort of gameplay-esque sense. So I took some notes here. I just sort of got up, and before I actually get to writing more stuff today, I wanted to use this as a sort of wake up and get back to the flow of working, because we just got done with Tibbs' bachelor party, who is our lead programmer. He's got his wedding coming up, and kudos to Tibbs, because Tibbs is he's a hard-working lad. So apparently, despite having a wedding this month, I was like, yeah, no, I'll have the next build ready. So it's like, God, now I have to pick up the pace even more to keep up with these people. God damn, they're just too good. Too good. Tibbs is just too good for this world. So, today we're going to be talking about story arcs and just sort of elements of the story and how they work in a sort of gameplay sense, as I said before. The first thing I want to talk about is the primary story arcs. These are broken down into chapters. Each chapter correlates to a zone, which correlates to a country. These are in turn calculated up in the first half of the game, depending on the actions taken by the player, of course. Following the second half, they will then be isolated instances in which results in future actions with these zones and or countries. So the entire idea here is that in the first half of the game, I'm not going to give too much narratively away, but I think you can kind of put together what's kind of going on. In the first half of the game, you'll be going through zones and instances or locations. In these locations, you will perform quests or various objectives, and there are a couple ways to do these said objectives. Now, some of the approaches the player may or may not take, or with the party, might result in certain factions, countries, or characters getting a little bit, ruffled feathers, if you will. Or maybe being a little bit more, on the player side of things. And so later on, these will have ramifications down the line. All chapter arcs will do something in terms of gameplay to the war mode, which will drastically affect the resources the player has at their disposal in the last act. The final ending is not derivative of the previous actions, rather it is based on the actions done in the final act due to the nature of the crisis. There are 3 planned endings, though these are susceptible to change if and only if narrative structure jeopardizes the next major arc. So if things get a little bit out of hand, depending on how the writing's going, we might actually write more possible major arc endings if it fits, if it makes sense, if it works. The only reason why I say we might take some away is actually there's only one in particular, which would make it only 2 endings, major arc endings. And these are major, like, world-altering endings. That's only if it makes sense. The one reason why the third one's kind of iffy there is because, while plausible, it has to make sense when it actually happens. So it is a story arc. So how we do stories, we do them sort of like gardening, and we write chunks. There's a couple of chunks for the ending, and there's one chunk that's really cool. It's like a really cool, interesting idea, and it would be a huge character-defining moment. However, if it doesn't fit the character when the event happens, as in if the atmosphere doesn't work, and it'll come off as forced, and we don't really want that. So that's why that ending is kind of up in the air, because we have to kind of write our way there, and that's one of those things where we'll only know if it works when we're actually there, and if it feels like it works. Because it could have huge ramifications down the line. Let's see here. Gotta go back through me bullet points. Mixer's Legend of Terrestria is actually a prologue. So, fun fact here. The whole game was actually originally meant to be a prologue of the original story, which was going to be called Rotfa, which Project 2, which we moved that down the line. But Legend of Terrestria, I thought it'd be really cool if we explored like this one thing where there was like this sort of it's a background bit for a character, really. And it was all meant to be like this huge arc, or not huge arc, but this huge thing for defining this character. But I felt like the only way to do it justice was actually to go through and actually create it. So that's why we actually picked Terrestria, which is a weird point to do in this universe called Mixers, but, it is what it is. Now, there's a couple things I still want to touch base on with the stuff I mentioned before about the war sort of mechanics stuff. That stuff is still kind of really loose and not even really touched yet, because we're actually focusing on basic combat, not that sort of advanced combat. But the idea is that these actions in these chapters will affect something big down the line, and the ending is not entirely derivative of the, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not quite derivative of necessarily all your actions previously. So you can play a certain style and do certain things in certain areas, and you should more or less, the idea at least, is that you will be able to achieve any ending you really want, depending on what you do in the final arc. The other thing that those other like that the stuff you do before is not really going to affect the major arc, because the major arc is more about the player being able to achieve an objective or not achieve an objective, or something throws that out of whack, depending, if so, there's another factor there if that works. um, but it's not necessarily derivative of the actions prior, but the actions prior do play a big role in actually building up this sort of, I don't know if you want to use the word coalition or something of that nature, but to fight, X, Y, or Z. And so it might be easier if you have achieved all the objectives and you have all these, nations wishing to help you, or it might be more difficult. It really just depends. Um, but now for the minor things, which I call compartmentalization, or little, it's basically to prevent butterfly effects, and this is for the overarching story, because again, the entire story is grafted to be a massive thing. It's meant to be an epic. It's not meant to be small. It never was. So I've been working on it so long. And so what I call this compartmentalization is it was to prevent the splinter or butterfly effect, and so I needed a way to draft it out in which it would work. So I broke it into 3 compartments. There's the romance one, which is recently added because honestly, it just seemed fun to do. Which is more like an optional thing and is completely, you don't have to do it at all. Then there's characters and then sub arcs. So you have the primary arc. Actually, I'll organize it in list of importance and how they go. So you have the primary arc, the character arcs, and the sub arcs. And like in between there, if you underneath the characters, if you want to put like romance as a optional thing. Now for the romance, one thing I want to quickly get out of the way with is it's pretty heavily scripted, as in who you can do romancy things with, because a lot of these characters in this one are hard coded, and the hard coded characters means that there is no character generation in this game. That was something that was actually planned for the other project, but in this one, because it was actually more of a backstory and more of a world building piece for a character, then we decided that it would make more sense to make the characters hard coded, because if you have sort of insert Shepard here from like Mass Effect, these insert characters, it wouldn't work because of the nature of the story. The story was in the past already, and these characters were already characters in the past. And so the entire idea was to keep it as, well, to not well, it wouldn't be too hard to be like, okay, erase this character who I really like, which is like killing your darlings, but in the wrongest ways, I think. And then create an insert character. And the insert character didn't work because it didn't feel natural. The problem with insert characters is they don't feel like they belong sometimes. It has to be a story that's grafted around the idea that the player character is somebody made and inserted into the story, which works later down the line, but not in Legends of Terrestria. And so back to romance. How romance works is it's sort of, this one is actually much more gamey than I'd like, and I'm going to look into changing it. But right now, I'm going to tell you honestly how it works. And we haven't even gotten close to implementing it. But how it's on paper is a romance can be activated between a character if, depending on which one we actually do, which I don't even know yet. It seemed like a really fun idea, and we're going to try it. But these romance arcs will have, I think, see, gameplay-wise, it's easier to write them off as quests per chapter, but it's like, no, it's not really how it feels. But basically, you'll get a romance quest, we'll call it like that for now, and these quests will generate points. These points will then be calculated up to see if the relationship works or doesn't work. And so at the end of the game, or around the end of the game, this would be like in the final arc thing, it'd be like, this character and this character, lived happily ever after, and it shows them with like a picture and tons of kids or whatever. Happy ending. Or it didn't work out and it shows them going their separate ways. Not necessarily making the characters, kill themselves horribly. I mean, maybe. Depends on if it makes sense, right? Oh well. But that's the idea, is it's just to get that in there, because that could be a system that could be worked on and improved later down the line. And that would work for an insert character, because then you could actually romance multiple characters, because insert characters, it would make a little bit more sense because character chemistry can evolve based on player decision. But in this one, because it's a little bit more constrictive when it comes to character arcs, which I'm going to move to just a second, it's kind of more essential to make sure that certain characters that would get together can be a thing, because chemistry-wise it works. And it has to be a chemistry thing, really, because it has to feel natural, or at least feel like it works. Because again, these are hard-coded characters. That's something always to be careful of. The next thing to talk about is characters. Now, characters all have their own arcs, and each arc is, if you want to do it, in a more traditional sense, we'll call it loyalty quests, right? And these can be anything from, and it's not just a single thing, right? These characters' loyalty is going to be derivative of, your actions and experiences with them. Again, you could almost chalk it up to a point stylistic system, but it's going to be more so in a narrative sense. In the essence that if you do actions with these characters and they approve of the actions that you're doing, because our morality system is not actually a morality system, rather it's based on the cultures of the universe, or of this world, I should say. And in this world, there are certain cultures and characters you'll pick up, or have the option to pick up, that have certain beliefs or certain strong feelings towards one or the other things. And there is no, like, blue or red. It's really just like, you do this action for this isolated instance. Most of the characters don't mind, but that one character is a little bit perturbed about that, and he might be affected by that, and there might be something that evolves with that. But does that necessarily mean that one action is going to throw that character out of loop? No, not quite. There'll be basically quests and things that you can do to fulfill their character's story. So you can see and explore these characters', relationships, dynamics, and see how their lives are and their problems, and you can also deal with them or not, depends. And by doing actions that might help them or might not help them, these might affect whether or not they stick with the party in the end when things get rough. And so if they do or do not, they might stay, they might leave, they might, betray you at some point. It depends. And so these are heavily, like, written in a narrative way. So again, each character arc is compartmentalized to their group. And how do you branch these together? Because a lot of things you're noticing are compartmentalized. I'm not going to move on to sub-arcs because romance and characters are compartmentalized, but they're also very, connected to not only that, but the party and the primary arcs, right? So some primary characters, they don't really get too heavily affected by that, but that also has to do narratively speaking. It's like, well, this person's a relative, and they're actually pretty close already, so it's a little bit more difficult for the two characters to drift apart. So again, if it makes sense and it works, we'll explore the options. It really just depends on how it writes out. And again, how do we branch these things together, right? So branching these things together is actually not that hard, because we have a sort of like a party hub, if you will, right? In which you can, talk to all the other characters, and you can sort of, that's where you'll get your, like, party quest stuff or character quest stuff for individual characters, or if you for the romance there. Sort of think of it as your, like, mobile camp, if you will. The idea behind this is that essentially you will be able to talk to all the other characters, and that'll feel much more impact around this. Adversely, if you were going out into a town or a hub, which I think we're going to have. This is also another question that I've actually been struggling with. So when you enter a town or a hub, like to get quests, you can only bring a couple characters with you. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, narratively speaking, it'd be kind of weird if you entered it with your entire party and there's all armed to the teeth and be like, that looks a little like an angry mob right there. And the second reason is we can actually do a lot more narrative focus there. So by certain characters you bring with, I want to do this, and it depends on if this works. Again, this will be stuff you'll see in the demo chapter, which will be completely free anyways. So if it works, you're definitely going to see early implementations of this. But depending on what characters you bring might affect some NPCs, and these NPCs might give things like, I wasn't really going to plan to go into quests, but this sort of just popped in here. So there are quests in our game, as you know. You can go to characters and NPCs and get quests. There are quests that aren't quite as easier to find. These quests are required to, meet certain requirements, and based on when you talk to these characters, you'll be able to piece these things together. So, like, let's say, for instance, there was a Baron. I always use this example because it's a really classic one. And, like, he lost a daughter, but you have a character in your party who looks exactly like her. By bringing her with, it might trigger him to do something. Now, that might be negative reaction. It might be a positive reaction. He might be like, oh, man, you look just like my daughter. And that might open up, like, a optional quest line or something of that nature. Again, everything in the story that I'm trying to do is try to make it as narrative focused as possible. Trying to remove the exclamation points out of the game. Which, by that, I'm referring to World of Warcraft, where you see an exclamation point above character. I kind of want to get rid of that. But I don't want to be so harsh to the player where it's like, if you don't do anything, you're fucked. But if you're playing a role-playing game, you should be expected to read. So, again, I kind of want to do away with as many of those as possible. The primary arcs, Again, primary arcs will be completable without these things, and those will be the things with kind of like an exclamation point. Not quite, but it'll be very obvious where you're supposed to go, adversely where you're not supposed to go. And that's the entire idea behind that. Because I kind of want to bring it back to, you have to read, you have to discover, and the idea behind Legends of Terrestria is an idea of exploration and learning. So again, we've engrafted the entire idea of the combat system and the like the bestiary, which is like your journal, is that you have to encounter monsters or enemy types to figure out their abilities by fighting them, or you can talk to other NPCs and characters that might know things, or like explore a library, find a book on these monsters. That'll add stuff to the bestiary, and that'll add lore stuff to your journal, which will sort of build and piece together this blank, empty journal that one of the characters carries around into like this fully fledged out, you know, entire descriptions of landscapes, countries, geopolitical situations, characters, and all sorts of things. That's the entire idea. Well, again, we'll have to categorize it. So there'll be the bestiary section for monsters and stuff like that, and maybe different enemies, NPCs. Like, okay, this character's, these soldiers from this province, they have, this armor, which is susceptible to this weapons and these types of attacks. And so you can sort of plan accordingly by using that information. You don't have to do it. It'll be stuff that you can figure out without doing it, but the idea is to do a little bit of mystery work. And so what I realized quickly in this game, that actually thinking about it in a detective sense actually made a lot more sense. And I wish I'd learned that sooner, because it meant I wouldn't have to go back and redo some elements of the story to make it fit that detective sense. Because like, actually, Legends of Terrestria was always about understanding, exploring, and discovery. That's something that I missed by a long shot when I was originally drafting it out. And so that's what I've been doing recently, is I've been going back, and that's why I'm redoing the first draft of the prologue right now, is to redraft it in a way that makes sense in a explorative format, as in, like, it's much more vague with things, a little bit more using of the mythos of one of the countries, because the character set location for the beginning arc is in the Empire of Astria, which is a sort of Hellenistic or Latinistic sort of culmination inspired nation in like in the universe it's the years 1022, but like the time period wise we're kind of in like a sort of pike and shot-esque era. We actually wound back the time because of this discovery, by the way. That wasn't actually too hard, because originally I was like, oh, it wouldn't be cool to do like with trains and stuff, but actually if we want to bring back more mystery and mythos, it made more sense to wind things back a little bit. And that wasn't actually too difficult, because a lot of the lore in the world that I've already built thus far, it was already that. It's just by removing certain technological advantages, I actually made it a little bit more difficult to learn certain elements of the thing, or of the world. The big blue ball that looks kind of like Earth, but isn't. So that's what I've been doing lately, as well as drafting up, the gods and the pantheons of the first, of some of the major factions. I've actually started by doing ethnicities. I found an interesting thing on World Anvil. It allows me to do ethnicities, and also I was doing Astrians, northern, southern Astrians, and what are various other peoples in the Empire, because the Empire is in a state of decay. It's in a rather tough point, because she's actually pretty small, smaller than she's been a long time. Her golden age is long sort of drifted away, and things are looking pretty gloomy. I would cite, if you want a historical reference, think of Byzantium in, like, I don't know, like in 1022, or towards the end of her life cycle, around that same ballpark-esque. Or not 1022, 1300, like, or no, sorry. Actually, no. I guess it's more like 900 or 800 AD. Like, there's still a turnaround point. But, things are looking dicey. That's actually... It's not the worst reference ever. Sometimes it can be pretty bad with them. But, yeah. And so we've drafted, various enemies around that. But back to the story, because, again, we're here to talk about the story. And I digress quite a bit, because I want to do sort of these developer diaries on how things work a little bit more. So, again, back to sub-arcs. Sub-arcs are like secondary quest lines, but they are actually secondary quest lines. These things are not necessarily like big enough to really make a huge difference, but they can. It depends on what it is, really. So you might get some like little knick-knack later down the line, or a reference to it later in the story, if it's big enough. Or if it's like, let's use an example here. let's say you found an old farmer and some generic ass shit happened. His old farm's dead. His wife's dead because a bunch of, I don't know, bandits killed him or whatever. And you got to go back and you got to go retrieve his ring. It's pretty standard, pretty stereotypical, or something, or some sort of heirloom towards that relationship. You'll retrieve that item, and then that'll be kind of the end of it. Like if it didn't have one. Now let's say it was like something like same instance but a different sort of character. Maybe it's still a farmer, but you do this and he actually joins the army later on, and you see him again, and because of you getting that ring, now he's a person who's going to do this thing, and there's actually another quest for him and a little bit more story arc for him. So it really just depends on the situation. It's not necessarily derivative of like what it could be. It could be something small. It could be a butcher's son. It could be, a baron. Like it could be big. It could be small. It really just depends on if it's interesting enough to explore. And these sub-arcs, again, are isolated. So what does that mean? I'm generally going to keep these things isolated to each zone. If, for instance, like the reference with the farmer, joining the army, then that would be a special circumstance in which the character would branch over into a different zone. But for the most part, I want to keep sub-arcs isolated, and any ones that are going to be moved over, we'll be tracking them. So that way we have sort of a records list, and we'll track everything chapter by chapter. And so that's how the general organization is to keep things on task is. Because, again, the issue with a big story like this, and especially if you're going for things that actually are going to have ramifications later down the line, or might, especially if Terrestria, if we actually do explore Terrestria's story further, it's important to keep tabs on everything that happens. So, in the ending, let's skip here to the ending, because, again, I'm digressing quite a bit here. In the ending, there's going to be a couple things that are taken into factor. The first thing are the primary arcs. What happens, or what is the fate of Terrestria, right? This is the most important question. Then the sub-arc endings will be affected by that ending, because everything bleeds down in this regard. So the character arcs, and like how did the characters live out the rest of their days in this hellish landscape, or something like that. Or, how did they live happily ever after, right? Depending on the ending. And then it bleeds down to the sub-arcs, and if the characters, are involved in some of those sub-arcs, because they might settle down in these certain locations, that might be affected there. That might affect where they go. And then that's kind of where it sort of stops. The romance one will be, crammed in there where it fits. But, again, that's more an isolated instance. And that's if players choose to explore it. Completely optional. Does not require exploration, just like most of the sub-arcs do not. If you don't do a sub-arc, honestly, I'm not thinking, like... I think I could write something. It'll be like, this character did this, but that might feel uncanny. It'd be like, who? If you missed one of the secret, like, sub-quest arcs, right, where you had to do a little bit of digging to find some of these things, because some of them will be hidden. Not all of them. But honestly, just paying attention and reading, you'll find all of them. I don't have a single doubt in my mind that you guys can't find them. But let's say you were just skimming everything. You're going to miss stuff. You're going to miss a lot. But, like, you're not going to see stuff like, if you didn't do a quest for Jimmy, the farmer, you're not going to get something in the ending talking about Jimmy the farmer. Unless it correlates directly to a character. It'll be like, Jimmy the farmer is now starving on the street, and because he was starving, he stabbed and shanked one of your characters. No. That's actually very cancerous, actually. Ooh, that'd be some really mean writing. You don't do my side quest and I ruin your ending. Oh, that's cruel. The sadistic person inside of me is like, yes, that would be funny. But that would be more grating, if anything. Be like, wow, you have to go and do this, generic quest. Again, if they're not done, we're not going to reference them, because it's just a waste. So if you do the main quest line, you don't do any of the sub-arcs at all, like, you're going to miss out on a lot of story elements and character building defining moments, but the ending will be a lot shorter because we'll be summing it down. I guess the best way to look at it is kind of look at how Fallout 3 did the ending. I don't really like Fallout 3. I think Fallout 2. Let's use that one as a reference. Where it talks about all the various people in quests and what happened. Sort of just giving you a sort of conclusionary summary of what is the state of the world and everyone at the end of the story. And if we decide to explore Terrestria more, then I think we'll touch up on that definitely a lot more. Terrestria has always been this sort of experimental idea. So a lot of it is experimentation. So we'll see how it goes. But I think there'll be a lot to learn from this one when moving into Project 2, which is the original one. That's going to be a while. So back to talking about the game and its development cycle. We have about now, time-wise, right? We can't sit around and take forever to make this. Like, while that would be great, we've got to get shit done. We got to get it done at some point, or we'll be fucking 80 and we'll be still working on this. So around 2 years, I think, is the general estimate when we're working on this. Is like by 2 years in development, we will either be somewhere or we won't. And what do I mean by that? It'll be like, well, we'd like to be at least done, not just with Chapter 1. But we'd like to be further down the line, like, I don't know. Let's throw a ballpark. We'd be done enough to the point where we'd either A, enter some sort of early access state, or at least be selling something. Because, again, a lot of people, the programmers in particular, are working on free time, just like I am, and just like most of the writing team is. The artists are really the only people collecting on any money right now. So most of the YouTube donations we get through Patreon or YouTube memberships, like that money all goes to them. Yes, legally speaking, here's what I have to normally say about that. That money is my money, okay? You guys give me that money because you donate, to me, my channel. I own the channel. However, what I choose to do with that donated money is I choose to give it in exchange for services to other things. And so I buy artwork and commission stuff, for other projects, which may or may not be related to this channel. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't directly. Actually, no, most times it always is, technically speaking, for tax write-off purposes. And that's why I kind of want to put, the Bickering bunch under the game development studio as well, which we still have to finish, some corporate documents. I mean, as far as legalization and, or copyright owns, Mixers as a universe is mine. I own it. But that was honestly the first thing to get squared away. Because, you want to own, what you're working on. But yeah, so most of the artists, we pay them on commission. And the reason for this is purely because it's a huge project, really. It's massive. And it does take quite the burden on, Now, let's talk about money a little bit here, because we'll talk about it briefly. While the donations are great, the donations, the game's not actually reliant on those donations. So if you guys didn't donate, let's say that about $200 in donation we make, because we make $139 from Patreon, make about, I think, $50 from YouTube, and about $30 from Subscribestar, and we make various donations during streams. Let's say we didn't have that. The game would still be made. I'd still fund it myself. But technically, 90% of the funding is still me. Because, it's a burden, but it's a burden I'm willing to bear, and that's nothing. I've got no problem with that. I've always intended for that to be the case, and I've always planned for that to be the case. And so I will carry that burden with or without those donations. So it's not essential that we need those donations or anything like that. You don't have to donate. Not something you have to do. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. But for those who do donate, it does relieve the burden quite a bit. But then again, I just put the same amount of money in anyways. But it puts more in is really what it is, and it helps things speed up a little bit. Those $200 in donations, I mean, that's a full concept. And what I mean by a full concept is most of our artists have an agreement where it's $200 per character or per thing, and that thing that includes all the drafts and everything. The various templates that Rhea went through. Rhea Vala, one of our characters, and she's a princess in the Valan line in the Empire of Astria, under House Vala, one of the, I think, 7 houses. My brain isn't thinking about it right. Let's see, Tarius, Halvest, Lanium, Vala, Esticles, Concordia, Tilius. I can count. I think that's 7. I'm not counting correctly. I don't think I missed any houses there. There's quite a few houses in the Empire of Astria. There was quite a few more, but now they're poofed. They're smaller. Oh boy. Talking about that made me a little bit exhausted, because thinking through everything again, because A lot of the stuff I had written down, and this is how it's working, but the stuff I was working on recently was actually not that. It was actually the opening prologue, right? And the idea is like, do we throw a wall of text at people? Well, I almost want to because it reminds me of whatever it's called, Star Wars. God, I don't know why that was so hard for me to remember. Like nostalgia purposes, that would be like a cool homage, but no, probably not. The prologue, I think we've all kind of decided to be something in the background, or not background, but something pre-lore ish, but sort of builds into something else, builds into where we are now, and the current character set. Oh boy, that was quite a yammering. I don't know why, but that kind of yammering makes me sad. And I have to stretch. I still am just getting up. It's pretty early. Okay. But that kind of concludes the talking about the story bits. Again, one couple things I want to quickly, briefly touch up on. Quests, I didn't really want to introduce blue or red options. Originally, way back when, I did want to do it like that, where it's like, oh, good or bad. But it's like, well, actually, the idea behind the Mixer's universe is not necessarily good or evil. It's about survival. Survival against a crisis. That crisis will be reviewed later on, and it's actually rather in-depth. There are 3 distinct major eras that cover, like, hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of years of lore, in which that these things or instances have occurred previously or in various circumstances. And it's a massive conflict, but it's actually more of an isolated instance in this one particular case, because we're in the 3rd and last era. That's where the story is set, at least. And the reason why I'm going to be more open with the storytelling and some of the aspects of it is because most of our funding is done through YouTube and, non-publisher ways. You guys are the people who do back us. You guys are the people. You are, in a sense, our publisher. I'm sure many people have said that before when they're small and decent. When they have, a dedicated fan base. And you guys are the guys who are going to care at the end of the day. It's not going to be like some AAA publisher who's going to give a damn about our universe. I don't really know if our universe will ever be this big, whopping thing. I don't really care. All that we need it to be is good. And as long as it's good, and as long as there's at least 1 or 2 of you guys out there, it'll be worth doing. It'll be worth making. And so I know quite a few people are interested, and so I figured I'd make this video to give you guys a little bit more insight into the story and the ideas behind that. I think the next things is what we'll start pushing towards is once we get this first sprite work done. So I'm gonna actually talk a little bit more about the development, what we're doing now, because might as well do these sort of developer diaries so you guys can actually see the full picture, because there's really no reason to hide it from you. So what's going on right now is Tyler's got a wedding coming up, so things have slowed down quite a bit in terms of programming. That's fine, because he's got his wedding thing, but he already said he wants to get the next build, I think build number 5 out, which I can't remember what's going to be in build number 5. I do know build 4 was huge. Like, there was a lot in build 4, but a lot got cut out for time constraints. Build 4 was awesome. Like, the health bar implementation, the grid implementation, that was pretty cool. I can't remember what's going to be in build 5. Also, build 4, I do like how, now if you move the sprite next to another sprite, that'll cause the combat to begin. It's actually really cool. To see it sort of be put together like that. I don't know. It's the first time I've ever gotten to see it. Up so close. And so eventually I do want to actually move into a public testing phase when it is got more meat in it. Right? Right now, there's not a lot of meat in it. Right now, the combat is quite simple in the gameplay essence, where it's just like move forward, bap an enemy sprite, which baps you back. Currently, it's got a placeholder decision-making thing, in which it gets bapped and it's like, oh, that hurt, but I'm not sure if I really want to retaliate. And it thinks, and then it's placeholder testing. But eventually, it'll come to the conclusion that you're a jackass and start fighting back. Like, why are you killing me? But it'll start fighting back. And again, the combat is based on a grid, not hexes. I don't know why people keep saying hexes every once in a while, but it's squares. Squares. 4-sided. Up, down, left, right. Though I do think movement axis-wise, you can move diagonally. At least that's the plan, that you can move diagonally. Or maybe. I'm not sure. It really just depends on how the balance works out for the diagonal movement. Might do it in the old school sense where it's up, down, up, right, you know. That reduces movement quite a bit drastically there. It really does depend on pacing. How long does combat take? 5 minutes? 20 minutes? An hour? Definitely don't want to lean towards an hour side of things, because that becomes grating, and you'll never get the game done. Most players would just drop it. Again, the goal is to make the combat as interesting as possible. That's why the magic system is the way it is. Which is, at this point, no longer called magic anymore. A lot of people in the studio stopped calling it magic a while ago. On occasion, we do call it magic, because, quintessentially speaking, it is magic. But we have it called something special. And that thing is the little word at the front of our game's title. The mixers bit. The reason why I gave it a name and why I kept with the mixers thing, which is an ancient thing, we actually got a lot of questions. I'll actually go into that here. Why not? So mixers, right, mixers. It's, honestly, I've always thought it sounded stupid. I've never thought it didn't sound stupid. But it wasn't something I actually came up with. It was actually the name it came up from Tyler. Sorry, Tyler. I thought it was silly, right? Because basically when we were little kids in 3rd grade, we would play in the sand and we'd build up these little sand bases, and we were like pretended like, oh, this is like a base, you know, for the clones from Star Wars. This one's a base for, you know, the UNSC or whatever from Halo or whatever cool fantasy universe we were into at the time. And we'd have these fictional wars and stuff like that, and fictional diplomacy things. We'd write it down on paper, and I have a lot of that paper still with me, where we wrote down diplomacy stuff between these nation states, and then it kept evolving until like we've incorporated not only everything possible, but we started making our own factions, and these our own factions started becoming things, like their own elements, and eventually, slowly as time went on, all the 40k stuff, which eventually came in there, but 40k came in at the last minute. It was like the last one of those fantasy universes to be implemented. Then we started taking them all out, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but our own ideas or our own takes on stuff. That version is still considered non-canonical. That's like that's honestly what I'll call the first edition of the Mixer's lore, because it's mostly just plagiarism. But that's what it is. It is what it is, right? That's what it was. But the idea and the spirit of making that game or that universe has always been a thing, ever since then. And so slowly, as time went on, in middle school, we redrafted it. I think middle school is around the time. I'm not sure if middle school is actually when Mixers came out, because just remember it. I remember Tyler talking to me, and that's was like, maybe we should call it that, and so we called it that. I think the name before was like the Never Ending Wars or something like that. It was something stupid. The Never Ending Story. Oh, so dumb. But yeah, that was how it was. And so that's why the name. Now, why did it keep the word mixers in there? Well, there's a couple reasons for it. Number one is my dog decided to open the door and interrupt my train of thought. Thanks, puppy. Like, I'm here to ruin your day. I'm kidding, puppy. You can come in here. Oh, puppy, you're so cute. You made me forget everything I was talking about. I hate you. But yeah, no, back to the game thing. Are you serious right now? Don't look at me like that. Oh my god. So my dog just came in here, opened the door, and now I was looking at the door because I closed it behind her, and she's like, looks at the door, looks at me like, open, let me out. You have to wait in here while I'm done ranting. So back to the mixers thing, right? Never ending story, never ending wars. Basically the same thing. Oh god. But either way, you know, the name came from something, and I wanted to keep it. And so there was an element in our universe that actually made sense, and how the magic works, because it was always kind of had a mixture of magic fantasy and science fantasy. Again, I honestly think it's more like a science fantasy, if anything. It was like, how can I make that work? And it was like, oh, the mixers. Well, let's use that name. We'll keep the name, and we'll use it for that, for what it does. And then it kind of works, in a sense. I think when people understand how it works, because it is a hard-coded system and how it works, it requires X, Y, and Z to do A, B, and C. Or it requires something to do something, and there's a method for how it works and how it gets power and energy. I almost think of it like batteries and how it works. Because you always need something actively charging it, or something to hold an active charge, in order for an ability or power to work. And how do powers come from? Abilities. Well, they come from gods. How do gods get made, you know? And there's this whole ecosystem of how this works, how souls work, you know, how all these things work. But again, that's more so stuff that's, you know, not character knowledge in universe, but it's a lot of knowledge outside of the universe. And so how those things all fit together. And the idea about why making the magic system have a sort of hard-coded thing is because it was always meant to be more science fantasy. It so happened that Legends of Terrestria was, you know, a more fantasy take on it. It was a more set back period in time. Or a period, if you will. It's weird how it works. I will admit, I may be a little bit too autistic when it comes to writing this, because it's honestly, it's too big and too in-depth that I think it will eventually turn off quite a few people, because the story is massive. Like, it's a combination of not only 16 now years of writing it, but a lot of it's also been cut, bear that in mind, because that's why I broke it into 3 editions. I think it was 3, right? The first one, second one, third one is this one. Third one, it went through some major ramifications, like several times, mostly because it was all figuring out how to make it work. It's like, okay, time to put it down, time to make it work. And that was like, why pick the art style anime? Well, because I really like the anime art style, but I've never thought it was done correctly or used properly. And I was like, why not use it for my story? Why not use it in a way that I think is the right way? No, it doesn't make it the right way. Because, you know, it's always subjective when it comes to creative format. I just never really liked anime that much. Well, that's a lie. I like things like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Things that have a much more Western storytelling take. But that's more of, again, personal preference, if anything. But I just wanted to, like, could you imagine, like, an epic told with this style of art style? And I thought that would be super cool. Just like when we found Seth and his, you know, musical talents, or Sal and his artistic talents. It was like, could you imagine these things in this sort of universe? How cool would it be to have that style of music, or that style of color palette and character design, artwork, in something like this? Honestly, I think it's never been done. Not in this way, at least. Everything's been done before. Everything always has. But I think the most common thing to think of is nothing is ever really done the same way. And so everyone's got a unique twist. And I think this twist is quite cool. I think it's worth spending my life on, at least. At least I value it to the point where I think I can do that. And so I've kind of consigned myself that writing this universe is going to be not really my magnum opus, or my, been ranting here. Got a little bit of a sore throat. Not from Tyler's bachelor party, I swear. Maybe. Puppy. Oh my god, she's the cutest, fattest doggo. She's looking at me like, let me out of this room. Look, you shouldn't have come in here. You know I was ranting. You could hear me. Dog. I get distracted easily by Doggo. Doggo is too cute, and I have a weakness for fluffy things. Nope. I know what you're thinking, but you're wrong. Not in that way. Terrible. Terrible. Alright, fine, I'll let you out. She'll be back in I swear. She always is. Opens the door. I think she just doesn't like doors closed. Oh well. What can you do? Alright, well that kind of wraps up that. I think I talked actually more stuff than I was actually originally planning to, but honestly, it's all stuff I want to mention eventually at some point. So the real question is, how much of the story do, you tell to the audience, which is you guys? Because again, this is something that's made for you. If you're still here, I'm pretty sure it's made for you at this point. And it's like, do I tell you about, the Astrian themes, the House Legions, how their armadas worked before and after they became an empire? Do I tell you about, the old ones, the original gods, the Republic, how it worked, the Celestial Pagan Order, the ancient religion before the Starborn cult became the mainstay religion in Astria, how the Imperial Senate worked, how the Senate's historically worked. Do I tell you about the Imperial Court, how that functions, all the characters within that? Like, what That's always been the worst part for me. I don't know where is the best place to start. The celestial ecclesiarchy, the various different forms or splinter faiths, splintered cultures, and how House Vala has its own unique culture to Estacles, even though they're both Southern Astrian as an ethnicity. Ugh. I think I got a stuffy nose now. I don't know why. And the real question is, what do I tell you guys, and what should I tell you guys? What should I leave up to explore? And honestly, I think at some point, especially because I do want to do that roleplay book, I do want to make a book, an RP book, if you will, for playing a tabletop RPG. Because honestly, I have to agree with Carlos. Carlos is one of our artists, and he was actually the one who gave me the suggestion, so credits to him. Because he's like, Kibs, you wrote this big, fucking retardedly large universe, and you're gonna waste it on just one story? And it's like, well, I'm not gonna waste it. I'm gonna use it to its full potential. But it's a universe that should be explored. And how fun would it be to make your own character in this universe? Because even though you can't quite do it in this story, I do want at some point the people or characters or players to be able to make their own characters and just insert themselves into this world. It's a world that I think is fun and it's interesting to explore. It's not something I'd ever want to live in. It's kind of like the 40K ones. Like, would you want to live in your own fantasy world? Like, no, because everything's horrible and shitty. In some kind of way, there's always a catch. In mine, there's always a catch. Like, wow, this is pretty good, but there's a catch. There's always got to be something in exchange for something. Oh, so vague. God damn it. I just did the entire dynastic family line for House Vala, and I'm like, I don't know if I like it. Oh, it's 1,000 years of family tree. Oh, you have no idea how sad that makes me. I think I'm going to redo it. Because doing it all in one go is like, well, one go, as in doing it all in a month. It was like, oh, that's like, I didn't do all of it at the same time, but I was doing it on the side. It just, I don't know. Maybe just doing it. Maybe I should also discovery write as well. Because I've been doing a lot of gardening when it comes to the story, which is basically planting seeds and writing stuff, you know, to be built upon later. But I think maybe I should just do some discovery writing because that might be more interesting than pre-planning every little thing out. Major things, yes. But maybe just mix it up a little bit. I've done plot chunks, which is sort of like plotting and gardening. But not a lot of discovery writing, to be honest. I did in the beginning, but not anymore. Maybe I'm just meant to be a gardener. I don't know. But I don't want to be a gardener like the Tolkien kind, where I don't get the entire thing done. I wanted to get it done at some point so people can play with it and have fun with it. The people that have supported us thus far, the people who've, you know, donated, I want them to be able to play it at some point. Excuse me. I don't feel that good all of a sudden. It doesn't matter, though, because I have to work. Sure, if I just have a drink, I'll feel better. Okay. Alright, time for me to go back to work. But, yeah, it was a fun little chat. I think I'll do these maybe once a month, kind of like I was talking about before. Where we just keep doing these developer diaries of sorts. Or like developer rambles. Oh, sorry. I don't know why. That was weird. I think I have a dry throat all of a sudden. Either way, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, you have yourself a fantastic day. And for those of you who are interested in the Legends of Terrestria universe, honestly, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on writing this. And I am going to be doing BT lore. The reason for that is, well, I honestly love my universe more than I love Battletech. And that should not come to a surprise, to be honest. Because, again, it's my universe. Of course I'm going to love it more. I put much more blood, sweat, and tears into it. And last night I accidentally got a nosebleed and I bled all over the prologue script. Now I've got to retype that up. God damn it. That's what I get for writing in a notebook. I didn't even notice I had a bloody nose until later. A series of unfortunate, sad, squicky times, as they say. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.